Over the course of human history, we've seen the development of dozens of different types of weapons, from the sword and shield all the way to missile technologies today. One technology that's remained relatively constant is the firearm. Conventional guns have dominated the world stage since roughly the 1500s. Now, something is looking to replace our standard ballistic weapons, that being railguns. Today on War Made Simple, we'll take a look at these weapons, how effective they are, if they're actually usable in combat today, and what the future of these systems might be. Hey guys, Bill here, and welcome back to another episode. So today we are talking railguns. A lot of you guys apparently wanted to talk about this because this was the winner on the poll. So for those of you who don't know, I hold a poll that goes on weekly to decide what these episodes are going to be covering. The winner on this one was railguns. So what is a railgun? Well, a railgun is basically taking two long magnetic rods, putting a charge through them to essentially increase or decrease their magnetic fields, and then putting a metallic object between it to fire it down the length of these rods. Now, there is a way to fire non-metallic objects. We're not going to talk about that today. We'll mention it a little bit, but that's about it. But the kind of important point that I want to make here is these are weapons that do not rely on the force of an explosion to move something. Additionally, they don't require on the actual munition itself to be explosive. All of the essentially power of these weapons comes sheerly from the force of its launch. This sounds kind of strange to not have an explosive round, but the damage these things deal by themselves is absolutely insane. One example I heard was this is the equivalent of getting hit by a school bus that weighs roughly 5 tons, going at 300 miles per hour. Yeah, these things pack a punch. So very, very, very powerful. Additionally, far range too. Conventional munitions can normally go around 25 miles to 30 miles at max, unless you're using some additional rocket propellant, then it's probably around 50-ish miles. These systems can potentially fire up to 100 miles away plus. In most militaries that are looking to use them, they're actually listed as anti-air systems because of essentially how far these things can fire. They're being built in some cases to take down hypersonic missiles. This is a really new technology in terms of what a lot of people know about it, but it's actually started development all the way back in the 1980s. So the United States military, being the United States military, was the first kind of group to take this idea seriously in a military aspect. There were some ideas during the World Wars, and the first true railgun, if you want to call it that, was actually built in the 1920s, but the first real idea of it being a military-used weapon didn't come until the United States in the 1980s. And we started kind of doing research and development on it in both the Army and the Navy. The Air Force couldn't have any way of using these right now, at least in their current form, and even back then, there was no way. So the Army and the Navy looked at it. The Army's done some development, but overall there's a big issue being power supply. And these things guzzle power when they are used. So you can't really use this in the Army sense. So that really, by default, leaves the Navy, and pretty much any Navy around the world that is interested in these weapons. There's a total of 3 nations still developing these weapons. The United States actually isn't one of them. But we're to talk about what the United States did in this sense. So the United States spent roughly 30 years developing this thing, 15 years actually building one and getting it to fire, and that is the one behind me. The United States Navy railgun program did have a lot of success where they actually built and test fired the world's first railgun. Really impressive, and if you haven't seen the video, I highly recommend you do because it is just amazing seeing this thing fire. Now, the Navy canceled this for 2 main reasons. The first main reason is actually due to power. They want to mount these on ships. The only ships that have enough juice to use these are nuclear powered, and we're not strapping these on top of aircraft carriers right now. They're simply too big of a weapon. So that leaves destroyers. In our early Burks, we've talked about them in other videos. They simply don't have the amount of juice to put into a weapon system like that. So you can't put it on our Burks. The ship that was supposed to replace the Burks, the Zumwalt class, we only built 3 of them. And they can power this system. But if you only have 3, you're not going to be able to mass produce this weapon system for that. On top of that, even if they wanted to mass produce it, they had a major issue with the system. And that was the fact that the barrel would be just essentially destroyed by the magnetic forces of the gun after a handful of shots, between, I've heard, as low as 2, as high as 12. Regardless of where you stand on that, that is not a high number for a gun being fired again and again. You're not going to go ahead and get a gun, fire 12 shots from it, and then be done. Not combat effective. So the Navy looked at kind of what they had on the board and said, we're going to shelve the railgun program. And in 2022, after spending 15 years and $500 million in development, the program was put on ice. It might come back, but as of right now, the US does not have an active railgun program that we know of. Now, I did tell you guys at the start of this, there was a type of railgun that did not fire solid shots. And the last time we heard anything about this type of railgun was in the 1990s, and it's what we call a plasma-based railgun. So you're like, oh, okay, so it fires like a conventional bullet using like plasma forces or something along those lines. Not whatsoever. It fires plasma. Yeah, no, I'm not making that up. It legitimately fires plasma. We have not heard anything about it since. I tried to do some research. If you guys know of somewhere I can find information on this type of railgun, I'd be thrilled. But I don't have any further information on it right now. If I get more, I'll do another episode on railguns once more. But that's the American side of things. Right now, either not doing anything or very, very quietly doing something behind the curtain. Now, I said there was 3 other nations making railguns, 2 of which we know a decent amount about, and then one of which we know almost nothing about. And the one that we know almost nothing about is India. We know that they built a 10mm railgun in testing, which is tiny for anyone who knows gun sizes. It works, they need to just scale it up and get it into proper working order for their Navy, because that's, I believe, what they're developing for. Could be wrong, but I'm 90% sure it's for their Navy. Now, the other 2 that we actually know a decent amount about is China and Japan. These 2 nations are developing it for naval use, and the Chinese actually have one mounted on one of their ships. But we don't really know much more about it than that. China has said that they successfully fired it, successfully tested, successfully done a whole slew of things with it. Problem is that data from China is often unreliable. I'm not saying that as an American with bias. As an example, the census that China took at the start of the decade, they kind of just admitted they overcounted by 100 million people. To put that in perspective, that is essentially missing a quarter of the entire population of the United States. I'm aware there might be some issues getting everyone to show up, but 100 million people is a big issue. And this isn't the only time China's had problems with this. So a lot of experts see what China says and says, we have to see this in use, in practice, and confirm it. However, most naval experts do agree the system at the very least does work. It's just to what extent it works, we really don't know. Now, other side is Japan. And Japan's works, and we know it works because the US is actually helping Japan develop theirs. My guess is we probably took our railgun specialists working in the Navy, sent them over to Japan, and jointly worked with them, at least on a small degree. I'm not saying the entire program shifted over there. But Japan's was mounted on a ship and successfully fired last year, I believe. Now, the Japanese version, unlike the American version, supposedly solved the issue with the barrel. Between 120 and 2,000 rounds can be fired out of this gun before it needs to be essentially overhauled. That's a much better use range compared to the American variant. Now, that is a huge range. I have heard all sorts of figures on this. This is just me giving you the information I've found. But at the very least, Japan's very serious about this system. So with one of our biggest allies and one of our biggest adversaries producing railguns and also looking to put a lot more time into it, why did America stop? Well, the simple answer is one we already talked about, and that's lasers. The system is designed to be an anti-air system, except lasers can do the same thing for pennies. Why spend more on a system that we haven't been able to develop well when we have a perfectly good replacement system that is in the field now and we can put on our ships that we have right now? So the US Navy has opted to leave those systems alone for the time being and focus on what we have rather than what we don't. So that's kind of all I got for you guys today on railguns. I know there was a little bit less detail than normal, but that's because there's generally not a whole lot out on these weapons. If any of you guys know where I can get more information, I would love to do a deeper dive into this weapon system because it's absolutely crazy, especially the plasma variant, because that sounds insane. But that's all I got for today. So the new poll for the next topic on the text for Monday is going to be out roughly coinciding with this video. I might wait a little bit later in the day when I know more people are awake to set the poll up, but we'll see what happens. So keep a lookout for that. All right. I will see you guys on Friday, where it looks like we're going to be talking about the People's Liberation Army Navy, aka the Chinese Navy. So with that being said, take it easy and enjoy your week.